The wind cut through the village like a knife, carrying with it the cold scent of wet earth and dying leaves. The streets were empty, save for a few desperate figures moving in silence, their faces hollowed by hunger. In the center of the market square, a small girl crouched beside a broken cart, her hands trembling as she held a ring, gold, worn, and engraved with a family crest. Alara had once been proud. Once, she had walked these streets with the confidence of a noblewoman, dressed in silks and laughter. Now the silk was gone, her hair tangled and damp, and all that remained of her heritage was this single ring. She had wandered for days, stomach aching, hope dwindling. The villagers barely noticed her as she approached a vendor, a thin man with gaunt eyes and a frown that could freeze the blood. "Bread," she whispered, voice barely above a sigh. "I will give you this ring. Just a loaf of bread." The man's eyes flickered toward the ring and then back to her face. He shook his head. "I don't want gold," he said, voice rough. "I want—" He paused, studying her. "I want your story." Alara froze. Her story? Who would care for the tale of a fallen noblewoman? Who would care for the shame of a girl too proud to beg, too proud to admit she had nowhere left to turn? But there was something in the man's voice, calm, almost commanding, yet not cruel, something that made her pause. I don't understand," she said, gripping the ring tightly. "Then you will," he replied softly, hooded and cloaked, so that the shadows hid all but the faintest glimpse of his face. "Tell me your story, and you may eat." Hunger twisted her stomach in knots. She could not explain the pride that burned even through desperation, but the smell of warm bread, stacked neatly behind the vendor, was too powerful. Slowly, she nodded, holding the ring out for him to see. "I am Alara. I was born to a house that cared for nothing but honor. We failed. The fields dried, the servants fled, and I was left to watch it all crumble." The man reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not touching, a silent invitation to continue. His voice was quiet, patient, but carried a weight that made her feel exposed, as though he could see through every layer of disguise and pride. I thought I could survive on my own," she whispered. "I thought I could hide among the villagers and no one would notice. But the world, it does not forgive weakness. And I am weak. I am starving. I have nothing left but this ring." For a moment, he said nothing. The wind whistled between the buildings, and the clouds above churned dark and heavy. Then he spoke, almost in a whisper. "And yet, you stand here. You face me. You offer your story before you offer your wealth. That is not weakness, Alara. That is courage." Alara's heart skipped a beat. Courage? In the shadow of starvation, she felt no pride, no valor, only desperation. Yet something about the man's gaze, so steady, so quiet, made her feel a flicker of warmth, as if he understood the hunger in her soul, not just her belly. "You may eat," he said finally, "but you must follow me. The shadows are not safe, not here. There are eyes watching, eyes that will see weakness and take it as prey." Fear surged in her chest. She did not trust him, but she did not see another choice. The streets were empty, the market felt abandoned, and she could hear the faint clatter of boots far in the distance. Soldiers, perhaps, or worse. She nodded, keeping her voice low. "I will follow." He turned, and together they slipped through the alleyways, moving as silently as ghosts through the mist. The streets gave way to the edge of the cursed forest, where ancient trees stretched their skeletal limbs skyward, and fog clung to the ground like a living thing. Alara's stomach churned not only with hunger, but with the thrill of fear. "Who are you?" she asked after a long silence, curiosity overpowering caution. "I am someone who watches, Someone who cares, he replied. The kingdom is dying, Ilara, not from famine alone, but from curses older than memory. I move among my people, unseen, learning what the world has become, what the world has forgotten. Ilara felt a chill, not from the wind, but from the weight in his words. A disguised king, a ruler cursed to walk unseen among his own people. She had heard stories, whispered among the noble houses, of rulers who had been touched by dark magic, rulers whose kingdoms decayed from within because they could not be seen or known. And now she walked beside one. They reached a ruined chapel at the forest's edge. Its walls were crumbled, stained with moss, and the doors hung broken on their hinges. He gestured for her to enter, and she hesitated, wary of traps and shadows. Hunger gnawed at her resolve, and finally she stepped inside. Inside, torches flickered to life as if by magic, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and wet earth, but it was warm enough to ease the ache in her bones. On a low wooden table he had placed bread, cheese, and a small flask of water. "Eat," he said. "Tell me everything while you do." Ilara sank to the floor, taking the food in trembling hands. She ate in silence at first, too weary and too shocked to speak, but as the warmth of sustenance filled her body, her voice returned. She told him of her family's pride, of the fields that failed, of the servants who abandoned them. She spoke of the nights she had gone without sleep, hiding from creditors and enemies alike, and of the shame of leaving her home with nothing but her ring. The man listened, silent, hooded, eyes glinting in the torchlight. He asked no questions, yet his presence demanded honesty. For the first time in days, Ilara felt seen, not as a desperate girl, but as someone who mattered, someone whose courage, however desperate, had led her here. When she finished, she lowered her head, ashamed. "There, that is my story. Nothing heroic, nothing worthy, just failure." He reached out and placed a hand over hers. The touch was light, almost ghostly, yet it carried warmth that seemed impossible in the cold, ruined chapel. "No," he said firmly. "You misunderstand. This is exactly why I want your story. There is power in honesty. There is courage in truth. You have survived what would break most. That is, worthy." Ilara looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time fully. Under the hood, she glimpsed something ancient and deep. Sorrow, wisdom, loneliness. She wanted to ask him who he truly was, why he cared. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, unsure whether she trusted him, yet unable to deny the strange sense of safety she felt. Suddenly, the chapel door rattled, and the torchlight flickered wildly. A cold wind swept through, and a low murmur of voices echoed outside. Soldiers? Thieves? Something older? Darker? Ilara's heart raced. "They are here," he said quietly. "They have found us." She felt panic rise, her stomach twisting. Who are they?" "They are the eyes of the palace," he said, voice low and grave. "There are those who do not wish me to move unseen among my people, and now they know you are with me." Ilara's hand tightened around the ring. She had escaped hunger, but now she faced something far more dangerous. Yet as fear clawed at her, a spark of determination ignited. She had survived famine and shame. She could survive this. The man, King, though she did not yet know, stood and moved toward the shattered door. "You must trust me," he said. "Do you trust me, Ilara?" She looked into his eyes, searching for deceit, for cruelty, for a sign that this was a trap. Instead, she saw only gravity and something like hope. She nodded. "I trust you." He extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together they stepped into the darkness beyond the chapel, into the misted forest. The trees seemed to close around them, ancient branches twisting like fingers reaching for the sky. Shadows danced, and the distant howls of unknown creatures echoed through the night. Ilara's stomach still ached, but her fear now mingled with something she did not yet name. A strange, stirring excitement. She was walking beside a man who was not what he seemed, moving through a world that was older and darker than she had ever imagined. The forest seemed endless. Every step carried the weight of history, of curses unbroken, of secrets waiting in shadow. And yet, as they moved together, a fragile bond began to form. She could feel it in the press of his hand, in the quiet patience with which he let her speak, in the weight of his gaze that seemed to see all she had tried to hide. She did not know who he truly was, or why he chose her story over her gold, but in this moment, she believed, just barely, that there might be more than hunger, more than despair in the world. And then, from the shadows ahead, a rustling sound. A footstep, a branch snapping, made her pause. The hooded man stiffened beside her. "They are closer than I thought," he whispered, "and they will not wait long. You must be ready." Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears. She had left behind everything she knew. She had survived alone, but now survival would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, cunning, and heart. Yet even as fear coiled around her chest, she could not help but glance at him, the mysterious, disguised king who had chosen her story over her wealth, and feel a flicker of something new, something dangerous and thrilling, something she could not yet name. The forest seemed to swallow them whole, and in the darkness, with the whispers of unseen watchers pressing close, Ilara realized one truth above all. Her story was no longer hers alone, and the night had only just begun. The forest was alive in a way that made Ilara shiver. Ancient trees towered over them, their twisted branches forming shapes like gnarled hands reaching for the sky. Fog clung to the ground, curling around their ankles, and shadows shifted in ways that made her skin crawl. Somewhere in the distance, the faint cry of an owl echoed like a warning. The king, though she still did not know him as such, walked ahead with a calm, almost unyielding grace. His hood hid his face, but Ilara could feel the weight of his presence, the quiet authority that seemed to make the forest itself bend around him. She matched his steps, clutching her ring as though it were the last thread holding her to the world she had lost. "Why are we here?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, though she did not want to admit it. "Why the forest?" He glanced at her briefly, the flicker of torchlight revealing a pale cheek and a strong jawline. "Because the world outside these trees is not safe for you," he said, "and because here you will see the truth. The kingdom is not only starving, it is dying in ways that gold cannot fix." Ilara frowned. She had expected hunger, thieves, maybe even curses whispered in old tales, but dying in ways gold could not fix. The words unsettled her more than the shadows. "Curses?" she asked. Her curiosity overpowered fear. "You mean magic?" He nodded slowly. "Magic, yes, but older than anything you have been taught. The palace, the fields, even the villagers, all are touched by it. Some call it a curse. Some call it justice. I call it necessity." Ilara's stomach twisted. Hunger, fear, and a strange mixture of awe filled her. She had grown up believing kings were distant, figures who existed only to command. Yet here was one, hidden, disguised, speaking of curses and responsibilities that stretched across lifetimes. "I do not understand," she admitted, her voice small. "Why tell me this? Why help me?" He stopped and turned, his eyes finally visible beneath the hood, dark and piercing. "Because you are honest. Because you survived when most would have faltered. Because I needed to see if someone still carries courage in their heart. And now, I see it in you." The words, though simple, struck her like a blow. Courage. Him saying she had it made her heart pound. She did not feel brave. She had run, hidden, begged, survived. But courage? Perhaps survival itself was courage, though she had never thought of it that way. They moved deeper into the forest, the fog growing thicker, until the air itself seemed to hum with an unseen energy. Strange shapes passed just beyond her sight, twisted roots, shadows that moved like living things. Every step was heavy with tension, yet every step also seemed to draw her closer to him, as though the forest itself had conspired to bring them together. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood the ruins of a grand estate, broken by time and some unseen force. Walls crumbled, windows shattered, but the remnants of beauty remained. Marble floors cracked, but their elegance still faintly glimmered in the torchlight. "This was once a place of power," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping the ruins. "Now it is a reminder of what happens when pride and fear rule instead of truth and courage." Ilara felt a chill. The estate reminded her of her own family home. The halls she had fled, the servants who had abandoned her. "It is beautiful," she said softly, though the word felt wrong for a ruin. "It is. And yet it is a warning," he said. "The curse that touches my kingdom is not visible at first. It creeps slowly. It tests loyalty, fear, desire, pride. And when it finds weakness, it devours what you care for most." Ilara swallowed hard. Hunger had been her enemy for days, but now she realized there were forces far worse than that. Forces that could destroy not just the body, but the soul. "Do you know this curse?" she asked, curiosity rising. "Are you immune?" He studied her, his dark eyes intense and unreadable. "I am the king," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Yet even I am not free from its shadow. I walk among my people unseen because the curse demands it. I see their failures, their hopes, their fears, and I cannot intervene openly or I risk losing myself to it." Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. The man she had thought of as a stranger, perhaps even a savior, was a king burdened by unseen chains. His power was not just in authority, but in restraint, in sacrifice, in the loneliness of centuries spent watching a kingdom slowly die. "And yet," she said after a pause, "you chose to help me. Even if the curse follows you, you reached out." He gave her a faint smile, almost hidden, like sunlight behind clouds. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "You do not hide from truth. You do not beg for mercy without offering honesty in return. That is rare." Ilara looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. Hunger and fear had left her weak, but the weight of his words gave her a strange strength. She wanted to trust him, to believe that his offer of safety and bread was genuine, yet a part of her remained cautious. The world had taught her that no kindness was free, no gesture without cost. The moment of tension broke when the sound of movement came from the shadows. A twig snapped, and both froze. The king's hand brushed against hers, light, almost protective, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth in the contact. "They are close," he whispered. "The palace has eyes everywhere. They will not allow me to remain unseen for long, and you may be in danger by simply being near me." Ilara's stomach twisted, fear and anticipation warring within her. "Then what do we do?" she asked. "We run," he said simply. "We move through the ruins. There are passages and tunnels hidden by time. We will reach safety. If we are quick. If we are silent." Together they moved, careful not to disturb the fallen stones or the whispering fog. The ruins seemed to twist and shift as they walked, as if the past itself remembered every step, every betrayal, every forgotten promise. Elara felt as though the walls themselves watched, and for the first time, she understood why the king had chosen the forest and the ruins as their refuge. Hours passed, though she could not be sure. Time seemed suspended in the fog, each step echoing in the silence. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a growing connection to the man beside her. Each glance, each quiet instruction, each fleeting brush of his hand against hers spoke of something more than survival. It was as if the forest itself conspired to bind them together, two souls navigating darkness, hunger, and shadow. Finally, they reached a hidden archway, overgrown with ivy and moss, leading to a small underground chamber. The king pushed aside a loose stone, revealing the entrance. "Here," he said. "You will be safe for now." Elara stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The chamber was small but dry, with enough space for them to rest. A faint smell of earth and stone filled the air, but it was peaceful compared to the oppressive forest above. "You must rest," he said, removing his hood. For the first time, Elara saw his face fully, pale, sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow and wisdom. The faintest lines around his mouth hinted at burdens carried alone. He looked human, yet more than human, as though time itself had etched power and loneliness into his very being. Elara sat down, exhausted. Hunger had been sated earlier, but now another need arose. The need to understand, to connect, to grasp the mystery of the man before her. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why choose my story over others?" He leaned against the wall, eyes distant. "Because your story carries truth, courage, and hope. You survived not by hiding, not by begging for mercy, but by facing the world as it is. And I need to know that courage still exists, that honesty still has power. Perhaps I needed to see it to remember what I fight for." Elara felt a flutter in her chest, a strange, unnameable emotion that mingled with awe and fear. She did not understand why he trusted her, why he shared this burden with her, but she felt herself drawn to him, pulled by the gravity of his presence, the sincerity of his words. "Do you always walk unseen?" she asked softly. "Do you never tire of being alone?" His gaze softened, and he looked away briefly, toward the faint light of the torches outside. "Alone," he said, voice low, "is not the same as lonely. But I have been lonely, yes, for centuries. To watch without intervening, it is a burden no gold can lift, no crown can ease." Elara's breath caught. She realized that beneath the power, beneath the authority, beneath the strange, almost terrifying presence, he was human. He bore his loneliness like a wound, and yet he moved forward, caring not for himself but for a kingdom and for those he chose to trust. The chamber was silent except for the faint drip of water from above, and in that silence, a bond began to form, delicate, fragile, yet undeniable. Two souls, each carrying burdens, fears, and scars, finding in each other a strange reflection of strength. A sudden, sharp noise from above startled them both, a stone falling, a branch scraping the earth. The fog outside seemed to pulse, and the shadows danced as if alive. "They are still following us," he said, voice calm but firm. "And soon we will need more than courage and honesty. We will need cunning, patience, and trust." Elara looked into his eyes and felt a flicker of something she could not name. Fear, yes, but also hope, and something stronger. She nodded. "I trust you." The king's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, the centuries of loneliness seemed to lift, as if her simple words had bridged the gulf between them. Yet the danger remained, lurking in the forest, in the shadows, in the whispers of those who sought to destroy him. And as they prepared to face whatever came next, Elara realized that her story, her courage, and even her vulnerability had drawn her into a world far beyond her own, a world of kings, curses, and choices that could alter the fate of the kingdom itself. The night was far from over. The forest outside pulsed with unseen watchers, and the ruins themselves seemed to hold their breath. But for the first time since hunger had driven her into the streets, Elara felt ready, and beside her, the disguised king, the man who had asked for her story instead of her gold, seemed ready as well. The dawn broke over the cursed forest in faint silver light, filtering through the twisted branches like fragile threads of hope. Elara rubbed her eyes, the warmth of the underground chamber now replaced by the damp chill of early morning. The fog clung to the forest floor, curling around roots and stones, making every step uncertain. The air smelled of earth and rain, but beneath it lay something older, something that whispered secrets of power and shadow. The king, disguised no longer in Elara's mind, though his hood still shadowed his features, stood at the edge of the chamber, listening. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the forest as if he could read its every movement. For centuries he had walked unseen, cursed to witness decay and betrayal, unable to intervene without drawing danger. But now, beside him, was Elara, a girl of courage, honesty, and unexpected strength. Together, they were no longer merely survivors. They were a force the forest itself had yet to reckon with. "We must move," he said quietly. "The source of the curse lies deeper in the forest. In the ruins of the old temple. That is where it began, and that is where it can end." Elara swallowed hard, her stomach twisting, not from hunger, but from fear. "The temple?" she asked. "What? What waits there?" "Truth," he replied, voice low. "And challenge. The curse will not release what it holds willingly. You will face it, and so will I. But if we fail, the kingdom dies, and with it, hope." She looked at him and felt an unfamiliar tremor in her chest. Hope. A fragile, dangerous thing. Yet she trusted him, despite fear, despite the unknown. She nodded. "I will go with you. I trust you." His gaze softened, and for a brief moment the centuries of loneliness seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Then we go," he said. They moved through the misted forest, stepping lightly over roots and stones, guided by a faint, unnatural glow that pulsed deeper within the trees. Shadows twisted around them, forming shapes of beasts long extinct, spirits of the past, and phantoms of the curse itself. Yet Elara walked without hesitation, her courage bolstered by the presence of the king at her side. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of ancient trees and fog, until finally they came to a clearing. In the center stood the old temple, crumbled and broken by time and dark magic. Vines twisted across shattered columns, and stones, etched with runes long forgotten, glowed faintly under the morning light. The air hummed with power, as though the forest itself held its breath. "This is it," the king said softly. "The heart of the curse." Elara's eyes widened. She had heard tales of cursed places, but seeing one with her own eyes was different. The temple radiated a cold, unyielding energy, pressing against her chest, testing her resolve. Yet she did not step back. "I can feel it," she whispered. It's alive." "Yes," the king said. "It feeds on fear, doubt, and regret. It has watched the kingdom for centuries, learning our weaknesses. But it can be broken, not by power alone, but by courage, truth, and heart." Elara's hand went to the ring at her finger, the last piece of her past, her family, and her identity. She felt its weight, not gold, not heritage, but the story it carried, the courage to survive, the honesty to share her story. She understood then why the king had sought her. She had something the curse could not take, something pure. Together, they stepped into the temple. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, and the shadows moved as if alive, curling around their feet. Whispers echoed through the broken halls, voices of the past, accusing, warning, tempting. "You cannot succeed," they hissed. "You are weak. You will fall." Ilara's heart hammered. Fear tried to claim her, but she held the king's hand. His touch was steady, grounding, a reminder that courage is not absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. "We are not weak," he whispered. "Together, we are stronger than any curse." At the center of the temple, the source revealed itself, a dark, swirling mass of shadow, twisting and writhing like smoke with a mind of its own. The runes on the stones glowed brighter as the mass pulsed, sensing their approach. It hissed, voices overlapping, pressing into their minds, dragging at their thoughts. Ilara felt the pull, the temptation to turn, to flee, to surrender to despair. But then she felt the king's presence, calm and unwavering, anchoring her. "Focus on truth," he said, "on courage, on the bond we share. That is stronger than fear." She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the ring's weight on her finger, its story burning in her mind. She whispered the truth of her life, her failures, her courage, her longing for hope. The shadows hissed louder, trying to drown her voice, but she did not falter. The king joined her, speaking his own truth, of centuries alone, of watching the kingdom decay, of the burden of power and the loneliness it brought. Together, their voices intertwined, resonating through the temple, a chorus of honesty, courage, and heart. The shadow shrieked, twisting violently, and for a moment, the darkness seemed poised to swallow them. But the light from their truth pushed against it, burning, bright, undeniable. Ilara felt warmth in her chest, strength in her limbs, and the darkness recoiled. The king stepped forward, his hand raised, not in attack, but in unity with her. "We are not afraid," he declared. "We will not let fear rule. This curse ends today." The shadow screamed one final time, writhing and shrinking, until it shattered like glass, fragments of darkness scattering into the air. The runes on the stones faded, and a calm settled over the temple, as if the forest itself exhaled. Ilara fell to her knees, exhausted but alive, and the king knelt beside her. For a moment, silence filled the temple, broken only by their ragged breathing. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." He offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. She looked into his eyes fully now, and there was no shadow, no disguise, only a man who had carried centuries of pain and burden, and who had chosen to trust her. "You were the key," he said softly. "Your courage, your honesty. It broke what strength the curse had left. Without you, I could not have done it." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her, a strange, thrilling mixture of pride, relief, and something more, something she could not yet name. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do now?" He smiled faintly, the first real smile she had seen. "I will restore the kingdom," he said, "and perhaps I will finally allow myself to live, not just watch, to care not just as a king, but as a man." They stepped outside the temple together. The forest, once thick with shadows, now seemed alive with soft light. Birds called tentatively from the trees, and the mist lifted slightly, revealing paths once hidden. The world felt new, fragile, and yet full of possibility. Ilara looked down at her hand. The ring she had brought, the symbol of her family, her struggle, her survival, shone faintly in the dawn light. And now a second ring appeared beside it, faintly glowing, etched with symbols she did not understand. The king reached out, gently placing it on her finger. "It is not gold," he said softly. "It is something more, a promise, a bond. Our story, beginning anew." Ilara's eyes widened. She could not speak, could barely breathe, as the weight of the moment pressed upon her. The hunger, the fear, the loneliness, they had all led to this. A bond forged not from wealth, not from power, but from trust, courage, and the truth of their hearts. The king turned to her fully, removing his hood. His dark eyes met hers, unflinching, and she saw the depth of his soul, the centuries of longing and restraint, and the gentle warmth that now reached out to her. "Are you afraid?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For what?" he replied, voice steady. "I am no longer alone. The curse is broken and we face what comes together. That is courage." Ilara nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her bones. She had survived famine, fear, and darkness. She had faced a king disguised among shadows, faced curses older than memory, and she had not turned away. She had survived, and now she was alive in more ways than one. Together they began the journey back through the forest. Every step was lighter, though still cautious. Shadows lingered, reminders that the world was never entirely safe. But they moved with newfound strength. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It was forged in fire, shadow, and the quiet, enduring light of trust. The villages they passed along the way noticed the change. Crops seemed greener, streams clearer, and even the wind carried a gentler tone. Word would spread of courage, of honesty, and of a king who walked among his people, not merely to rule, but to heal. And as they reached the edge of the forest, sunlight breaking fully through the clouds, Ilara realized that she had been transformed as well. She was no longer the girl who fled hunger and shame. She was a witness, a partner, and a survivor. Her story had begun in desperation, but it had ended in hope, courage, and the beginning of something she could never have imagined. The king looked at her, his eyes soft, yet full of gravity. "The kingdom will survive," he said, "and perhaps we will find more than survival in the days to come." Ilara smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the ring on her finger and the strength of the bond it represented. "Perhaps," she said, voice steady, "we will." And together they stepped into the dawn, shadows fading behind them, the curse broken, and a new story, one of courage, love, and transformation, just beginning.